the outside of the room at our hotel, Bismark, North Dakota. From here we're about to set off. We're going to go down the riverside walk, about a mile and a half, to pick up the riverboat to take us on to Fort Lincoln.
She's a mighty river, rolling river.
At Bismark, sitting at the top of a hill, sweat pouring off us, waiting for the 2:30 sailing of the Lewis and Clark paddle river steamer.
Thing.
Pardon?
Fish.
To Fort Abraham Lincoln. At the present time, sitting at the top of the hill, looking over the Missouri, looking at what not so very long ago was Indian.
Cross the wide Missouri, oh Shenandoah, I love your daughter. You're rolling river, I'll take her across your rolling water. Away, we're bound away. Cross.
The fort is alive and well and in good hands. Rising atop the western bluffs of the Missouri, this is one of the 3 reconstructed blockhouses of the infantry post. In 1907, Congress designated Fort Lincoln as a historic site and turned it over to the state. Archaeological digs were conducted, which marked locations of most military buildings with brick and concrete cornerstones. Now, from this excellent vantage point, you can survey the outlying land. To stray beyond the stockade in those times was to invite a bloody end at the hands of hostile Sioux. Looking north is the twin city, Bismarck-Mandan. Much of the aura surrounding the history of Fort Lincoln can be attributed to General George Armstrong Custer, who rode into the pages of history at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. When the 7th Cavalry broke camp on May 17, 1876, the Heart River Valley was covered by an early morning mist. As the sun broke through, a mirage appeared, forming the illusion that Custer's command was marching both across the land and into the sky. The regiment would never see Fort Abraham Lincoln again. There it is, Cavalry Square. And to the right, the Custer House. Flies going in my ears.
Film.
That weekend there happened to be a fur traders rendezvous at the post. The lady standing next to me is our excellent host, Breezy Coles, of the Fort Abraham Lincoln Foundation.
Yeah,
next weekend, I believe it's at Fort
Stevenson, isn't it?
Is it? Yeah.
Garrison.
Yeah. So we all the birds. And boy, in June, at the end of June, we had the infantry army out here. And that was. And it is proper to have the kepi on at all times when you're on duty. Even when you go inside the doors, you're to wear the kepi. Now, if you're on a social call, when you walk into the house, you remove the kepi, and it's held in your left hand with your fingers over the brim of it. The sabers here, there'll be a 7th on top and a Company F underneath that tells whoever is looking that I'm part of the 7th Cavalry, Company F. This is the blouse that I'm wearing. It's 100% wool, and I believe the temperature got up to right around 90 degrees today, so I am extremely warm. You'll see the red face, I'm sure. It's supposed to do that. The blouse, being made of wool, is a breathable material. The undershirt, which I'm not supposed to expose, but in this case I will, is completely saturated with my body perspiration and is wet. It holds the water. Now the breeze picks up here in North Dakota, and we always have a breeze, blows through the wool uniform, it is breathable, hits the undershirt and cools me down. I am actually cooler than I look. Or at least I choose to believe that till I can take it off. The trousers are 100% wool, and when marching, this little finger is to be kept on the seam of my trousers at all times. It's an uncomfortable way of marching, but that's the way they've done it back then. Nowadays they've advanced to the hand movements a little bit. The boots are left over from the Civil War, or the War of the Great Rebellion. The reason we can have them out here in the post in 1875 is they would have extra supply left over that they would have shipped out to the frontier posts, such as Fort Abraham Lincoln. You'll notice the other boots that gentlemen are wearing out here, other privates, will have the smooth leather on the outside, and it'll be polished to a black. That's what they're changing over to at this time.
So they were the new replacement stuff.
Yeah, that's what they were going to. It was a little more neat. There was no right and left to the boot. You would put your feet into them. Chances are they'd be 3 or 4 sizes too big for you. You'd fill them with water and march with them for a couple of years until they shrunk down around your foot and you broke them in. Currently, I have 3 blisters on this foot and I think 2 on this the last time I counted. But I guess I'm stubborn enough to wear them because I broke them in.
You're going to beat them. They're not going to beat you.
Yeah, I'm going to stay with it as long as I can. The belt is to be polished at all time and wore just above the last button. Now I was on skirmish about 3 minutes north of here, and I was crawling on my belly, unfortunately, and I happened to lose the last button. But I'll have the laundress over at the post sew that on for me, and I'll be right back into uniform. And the belt is to be worn at all times. The side pistol that was standard issue for the cavalry was a .45 caliber. Be kept at this point. I would have cartridges in the back of the belt for the .45-70 or the .45-50, which was the .45-70 cut down. You cut the barrel down a little bit so you can pull it out of the saddle that much quicker.
How many cartridges would you carry?
50. Rolls of 20, 25. And then I'd have now they also had a belt with cartridges where you're able to carry more. I'd also have another pouch here for the pistol. So I'd be holding almost 75 rounds of ammunition. When Custer left to the battle at Little Bighorn, he left with over 200,000 rounds of ammunition, well over 150 wagons full of supplies. So he left well prepared, full of supplies. So he left well prepared. Any other questions I can answer for you?
I don't.
When the 7th left for the summer expedition in 1876, they marched along this road to the tune of The Girl I Left Behind Me. The general then split the cavalry off to the left through that gap, whilst the wagon train went off to the right.
So you know where you slept. So you come along and the next person takes shift, you turn their foot locker in that direction, you turn yours back so you wouldn't get confused. Last thing you want to do when you're in a good sound sleep and only have 3 hours a night to sleep is be woke up mistakenly. So that's, turn your footlocker in that direction. Over here is where you put you store your gear, hang up probably your best blouse and shirt over here. Your footlocker would take your other personal belongings.
These for the Custer House tour. It's starting in a few minutes. Starts on the front porch.
On the steps of the porch leading into General Custer's house.
These photos of the original Custer House were taken in 1875. Our house guide begins by explaining how the Custer's first home at Fort Lincoln was destroyed.
Explosion, and that's what caused their home to burn down. It blew off part of the ceiling and part of the wall, so really got their home started on fire pretty good. It burned so fast that they had to just get out of the house with their own safety and not worry about what was inside being destroyed. Mrs. General Custer lost two things that she especially held dear to her heart. One was a collection of newspaper articles that she had been saving. These articles had been written about the general ever since he was in the Civil War, so it was almost a 10-year collection. And then the other thing was a wig that she had made from his hair, and she would wear this wig to fancy dress balls. So she lost both of those things, but then a few months later they were given orders to build the second house up. And since they had a chance to start over and build the house up again, they decided to make a few changes. Alter the house's appearance a little bit to make it look more like what they wanted their home to look like. They added about 3 feet to the front porch, and there's a large veranda that goes around the north side. That was also an addition. And there are some other things too that I'll be pointing out to you as we go through. One thing, when we step into the parlor, we're going to go back into the year 1875. And that is, of course, when the general and his wife were still living here, and they were alive and well and doing fine. And I'll be a maid that they had at that time. So when we step into the parlor and go through on the tour, you can feel free to ask me any questions at all, but you have to phrase them in the 1875 time period, because I won't know anything about what's happened after the year 1875 once I step into the parlor. So if you have 1993 questions, you'll have to hold those until we are out on the back of the porch at the end of the tour. And then there are a couple other things I want to let you know. We have some items from Fort Lincoln that are original items, also items that the Custers owned themselves. I'll tell all of you to take special note of those things, and that's how you'll know that those are the original items we have. Everything else is furnished in the right time period. And also, since everything is furnished in the right time period, many things are very old and fragile. I would like to let everyone know to please resist the temptation to touch anything in this house. Also, we have white chains set up throughout. Stay inside those and don't cross beyond them. And we can start by stepping into the parlor and this General Custer and visit for a while this evening. But because they don't get a lot of time to spend together, they are off horseback riding, and so they won't be able to visit with you just right now. So I've been asked to show you through their home instead. Now there are two draperies right up here on the wall, the maroon, green, and gold ones. Later, the parlor right people, so they're always having visitors come in from the east, and any officer who lives on Officers Row has an invitation to come into the general's home anytime, day or night. So it's very busy here. The bay window that you see in the wall, that was another addition for the second house. Now, the reason that was added is because Mrs. General Custer feels that military homes look very plain and boring, and she didn't want her house to look like that. So she had them add this window to vary the outside lines of the house and make her home stand out from all the rest here on the fort. Now, in the officers' quarters directly next door to this house, the general's sister lives in that home with her husband, Lieutenant James Calhoun. And also then In the officers' quarters 3 down is where the general's brother, Captain Tom Custer, lives. Over here you'll see that we're entertaining. You'll be asked to sit down and help entertain everyone. But Mrs. General Custer usually is the one who plays the piano, and the general's sister, Mrs. Lieutenant Calhoun, plays the harp. Also, we have guests coming out from the east. The second they walk in the door, we sit them down and give them a hearty meal out here on the prairie. And that's because transportation out here takes so long that it takes a lot of energy out of our guests, and we also just want to welcome them to the home. So I always have to make sure that the table is ready anytime, day or night, because the travel is so unpredictable. Guests might be anywhere from 2 weeks early to 2 weeks late. We just really can never tell. And now some of you Easterners, I have heard you talk when you get out here and you eat a few meals that you're surprised that we eat so well out here. Lots of you have this notion that we don't eat right out on any type of military post. The only thing we don't get to have, though, are fresh fruits and vegetables. Now, since shipping takes so long, anything that's shipped out to us usually rots by the time we get it. And our guardies have never had much luck against the grasshoppers, so we just eat canned fruits and vegetables instead. But now the general's favorite food out of any that he could choose from are onions, and he likes to eat them raw and whole, like you and I would eat an apple. And now I have to share a little rumor that's going around that the enlisted men have started. I think they've done this just to get back at him every now and then. They say that the reason the general and his wife don't have children yet is because of his favorite food. But I'm not sure about that. Now we can... No, sir. The strikers to earn extra money, and then they do work for us as well.
How about some of the scouts?
He gets along with his scouts
Do
just
they
fine.
come in the house?
Not very often, no.
No.
Orders for the day. So other than that, the general catches her in here, he'll scold her and make her leave right away. Since she's the daughter of a judge, he doesn't want her to worry about any of the cooking or cleaning, and she is just supposed to focus on entertaining everyone. Oh, and spend time by yourself whenever you want to. But all 3 of us are given the same salaries. We each receive $256. Now, if you're going to be walking around on the fort, though, this evening, and you'll perhaps need to say something about a chamber pot for some strange reason, you'll have to call it a thunder mug, because that's what we've nicknamed these. And you can figure out why we've called them that for your own.
They call them gazundas.
What do you call them, sir?
Gazunda.
On the wall. Each room gets its own wood-burning stove, and the chute is connected to that vent. And that's how the rest of the entire upstairs is kept heated. There are 3 pieces of marble-topped furniture in this room, the washstand and this small little table, and also this dresser, that I want you to take special note of all 3 of those. Now, if this room isn't used, closet, and that doesn't happen very often, though, because their guests who come out here stay up to 6 months at a time. And that's just because it takes them such a long time to... We are quite a ways from the east and from fashion. The ladies who are here with their husbands feel it's very necessary to keep in fashion with all their lady friends back east. So they are wearing corsets just like everyone else is. Now, the reason they wear these corsets is because it's fashionable to have a 16 to 18-inch waistline. So they tie these corsets up so tight that if they eat too large of a meal, or even if they walk up a case of stairs too fast, they'll faint. And when they do faint, we bring them up to the nearest fainting couch. The sides of it recline down, and we put the lady across. We have to loosen her corset, fan her to make her feel a little more comfortable, and if we have to, we will break out the smelling salts. To this, because they go through it about 3 times each day. That's how much they'll faint, because they were up in this chimney area. Now, since that first house burnt down, they decided that in this house they want a large room like this for entertaining. They use it a lot more. The pocket billiard table that you see is on loan from the Fort settler, and billiards and cards are some of the most important and most popular pastimes out here. We also, military band will come up here and line up against the table and play for the couples. We clear this area out so we do actually fit about 20 couples in here. Picture on the left have the same two people with some military aids. Hunt. It's one of his favorite things to do. Another hobby of his, though, is to do his own taxidermy before he puts the trophies on the wall. Now, there are quite a few pictures up around the room, and I'll point those out to you. Now, it was on every battle and expedition that he goes on, and the pack trains carried around from place to place. And the last thing for you to take special note of is this rocking chair in the corner. Now, lots of people are shorter than theirs back home, which they really shouldn't be if you're doing what you should be at night, and that is sleeping sitting up. Now, by now, all of you should. Now, the general says it's to get out to the outhouses quicker, and they are just right off. On the back porch were brought back to 1993. And I want to thank everybody for coming through the Custer's house. And
The next day we were on the move, travelling along Highway 94, which virtually parallels Custer's route in 1876. On the way, passing through Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Alright, we got a good look at Pompey's Pillar, which is well known due to it having Captain William Clark's signature carved in the rock, the only remaining physical evidence in Montana of the Lewis and Clark expedition. What else would you expect to find in a room at the Lariat Motel? But a lariat, of course. Friday the 13th of August 1993, we were at the scene of that momentous conflict that happened 117 years ago. To begin our visit, we took a van tour of the Little Bighorn Valley, the site of the Indian encampment. The driver was explaining Custer's plan in dividing the regiment.
If they could isolate these women and children, surround them and hold them as hostages, they knew full well these warriors would never fire back into their family members.
John, you can't go off. Yeah, you can't go off.
Our first look at Last Stand Hill. To the right, down by the cottonwood trees, is the route of the Little Bighorn River. And in the valley for 3.5 miles lay the Indian encampment. This is the marker of the General's brother, and also his nephew, Orty Reed.
If they come in there every year, honoring them. I've seen 300 and 400 of them camped, and when they left, you couldn't find a match with.
Wait, now in the hands of a trained trooper, underline that in boldface a number of times because that is a very key word. Trained trooper expected to fire this weapon 12 times per minute in combat. It can be done by hitting a target. Not where the van is parked up on the ridge. Through harrowing fire. It's not hitting an individual target at those ranges, it's hitting an enemy formation. We are not operating under 20th century military tactics here. Why? Because they don't exist yet. 19th century military tactics, Civil War tactics, which are an outgrowth of the Mexican War, which are an outgrowth of the Napoleonic Wars. We're still operating these large behemoth formations of maybe brigade size, 2,000 or 3,000 men marching in packed formations, shoulder to shoulder, maybe a frontage of 500 men. Yeah, I can sit here. I can nail an enemy formation where that van is sitting by itself. I'm not hitting an individual. Individuals will be hit. I'm firing at the formation. That can be done. The Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, however, do not play by the Queen of Marksbury rules, massing up conveniently for you and riding into the face of the blazing carbines of the 7th Cavalry. You'll be very hard-pressed now to hit an individual at those ranges. Why? The government's only allotted you 1 round a month, target practice. You hit a target 400 yards away. Good luck. You're not going to do it. Not at 1 round a month. This weapon is state-of-the-art in 1873. It came out. But it's not that good. It's not meant to be fired in that manner. It's meant for these massed, controlled volley firings at packed enemy formations at 400 to 600 yards. And you're not generally engaged. You're generally engaging the Sioux at farther ranges than that. An individual. Stab beyond a horse in the spine. You've got an unmanageable horse. Combat is the least of your worries at this moment if you can handle one catastrophe at a time. Dismounting your animal, also highly critical. You keep left hand firmly grasped around the stock. Right hand on the horn of the saddle. Right leg thrust over the rump of the horse. If you are attempting to balance this, as a lot of young men will, as they're dismounting the animal, you get almost all 7 pounds of the oak butt in your groin area. Ready and fully, thoroughly incapable of any rational thought for the next 20 minutes. Puppy here. Very low powder charge, which means if I can hit something effectively at that pedestrian ahead sign, I'm doing pretty good. Generally, that'll be the ranges that the men are engaging their enemies at in the latter stages of the fight. You don't want to have to pull these out to defend yourself. This will be the last thing you hold in your hand in your mortal lifetime. Cavalrymen never fought with these. They're notoriously poor shots. Best suited for the barroom fights with Matt Dillon and Festus and the Cartwright boys at the Ponderosa. Not anything that the cavalrymen will ever utilize. Of course, if I'm in Hollywood, I can hit things down in the interstate with this. These things have a remarkable range. Also, I'm only going to fire 5 or 6 shots off in a row with this. If you're going to be foolish to load this up with 6. I mean, it's a very unstable weapon. You're going to be bouncing along the trail, resting, and bam! It goes off. Your nickname now is Lefty, and you just killed your horse, and you've got a problem.
79, primarily to look after and protect the graves of those who died here at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. To Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his 2 brothers, Tom Custer and Boston Custer, a nephew, Audie Reed, and about a half a mile off to the right is the marker for Lieutenant James Calhoun, George Custer's brother-in-law. So altogether, there were 5 members of the Custer family that lost their life here on that Sunday afternoon in 1876. Now we can see the monument on Last Ant Hill off to the right. And that monument does contain the names of all who died here at the battle, including the civilians and the scouts. Now in about 50 minutes, we'll be coming back through this area toward the end of the tour. And at that time, if there are any of you that would like to get out at the top of the hill and look at this area more closely and then walk back to the visitor center, please let me know at that time, and I'll certainly take and accommodate that. And of course, for those that want to ride back to the visitor center, we'll certainly do that also. Now off to the right of the van, and later off to the left of the van, you can see markers down in those fields. Well, in the days following the battle, the men that died here were given a rather hasty burial, but the best under the circumstances. And if the name of the trooper was known at that time, it was written down on a piece of paper, That paper was then rolled up and placed inside of an empty rifle cartridge. Teepees out there this afternoon. And at the time of the battle, there were somewhere between 1,000, maybe 1,200 teepees spread out in this valley floor in those 8 individual villages. Now, they would not be canvas teepees like we do see out there today. They would be made out of buffalo hides, perhaps other animal hides. But once those hides did bleach out in the sun, they would look very similar to the teepees that we do see out there today. You'll see a more bright green field very near the interstate. And where that bright green field is where the southernmost village, or the Hunkpapa village of the Sioux, was located. And that is the village where Sitting Bull and his family lived at the time of the battle, and also where the great war leader and war chief Gall and his family lived at the time of the battle, out in that Hunkpapa village.
Stopped in the valley and formed a thin skirmish line when Indians raced out from the village to oppose him. Outflanked, Reno fell back into the timber on his right. Pressure from all directions convinced Reno this position was untenable too, and he retreated after 30 minutes of action. Reno's force was subject to attack by mounted warriors from all quarters. After crossing the river, the remnants of Reno's battered command took up a new position on the bluffs, having suffered over 30 men killed and 13 wounded.
These are the hastily built rifle pits formed by Reno's men on the 25th of June. Looking out, Indians controlled all this ground and kept the cavalry under siege for 2 whole days. After many years of reading about the last stand, I wasn't going to be satisfied with a short bus drive back to the visitor centre. I wanted to appreciate the distances and terrain the troopers had to face that Sunday afternoon. So leaving the bus behind, we set off on a 4.5-mile walk along Battlefield Road.
Some rivers last forever, knowing many things, carrying their secrets, summer, winter, fall, and spring. If only you could tell me the things I want to know, but you just keep a moving, traveling oh so slow. Bighorn River, how long will you last? Keeping your secrets hidden from the past, taking them with you is all you can do. I wish you could tell me.
Point. 3.25 miles to go. 3.25 miles to go. It's only 3.25 miles to go. Oh, oh. A horse of the 7th Cavalry. He was born in an open prairie in 1865. 504. Mustang pony, running wild, running free, till the army came and brought him and took him far away to the stockyards of St. Louis, where he was bound to stay. Decided to a new master he would go, a big strong man, called Miles W.K.O. and Miles was a captain in the 7th Cavalry. On and on. A little.
Comanche rode west from Fort Lincoln with the 7th Cavalry to the big skies of Montana and his place in history. There at the little Bighorn battle, unknown to them all, those brave men of the 7th heard their last bugle call. Comanche, Comanche, brave horse of the 7th Cavalry.
This is the approach to Medicine Tail Coulee, the location that is widely believed to be where Custer attempted to cross the river and attack the Indian village. He was repulsed and forced back onto Battlefield Ridge and the Last Stand. These horses belong to the Crow Indians who own the land between the Reno, Benteen and Custer battlefields. I was to discover later that you can hire them to ride this section of the battlefield. That would be an experience to remember. Not that I need an incentive, but there's a good reason to return one day. Sergeant Butler very nearly got away. He is believed to have been a last desperate messenger in an attempt to bring aid. Just when he was about out of range, one last shot brought him down. As we now approach Battlefield Ridge that leads to the Last Stand Hill, white marble markers now appear more frequently on either side of the road. Lieutenant Calhoun, Custer's brother-in-law, swore to the general that if the time ever came, he would never let him down. And from archaeological digs, it seems he kept his word, as Calhoun Hill was the scene of intense and organised defence. 35 years later, and my number one ambition in life is realised. I'm standing on the hill where Custer made his last stand.
On this ridge, a granite pillar stands over the mass grave of soldiers killed in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, June 25th and 26th, 1876. At this site, hundreds of Sioux and Cheyenne warriors defeated 5 cavalry companies of about 220 soldiers under the command of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. As you look over the battlefield, you can see the white markers showing where the bodies of soldiers were found after the fight. No markers show where warriors fell because very little is known of their casualties. Probably less than 100 were killed, and the dead were removed by their families immediately after the battle. Only the Sioux and Cheyenne words tell us what happened to the 220 soldiers killed in the fight. Some Indian accounts say that Custer and his men tried to cross the river 1.5 miles south of here at Medicine Tail Coulee, but angered warriors raced across the river and forced the troops back to the ridges. Having lost the initiative, the soldiers found themselves in rough terrain unsuitable for mounted action. As Gall and other chiefs led their warriors across the river at several places, Custer and his men fought desperately on foot. The warriors did not need to expose themselves to the troopers' fire. Dismounted, they moved from sagebrush to sagebrush and took advantage of the numerous ravines. Finally, Chief Crazy Horse, crossing farther downstream with a large force, swept around this ridge to attack from the north. Here, about 50 soldiers gathered around Custer, shot their horses for breastworks, and fought to the end. The battle lasted 2 hours at most. After the Sioux and Cheyenne had departed, General Terry's column arrived and hastily buried the soldiers where they had fallen. A year later, the remains were reburied, and the bodies of 11 officers and 2 civilians were taken for interment elsewhere. Custer was buried at West Point. In 1881, the granite memorial was placed atop the ridge, and the remains of the soldiers were gathered from the field and placed in the mass grave at the base of the stone.
What was it like for those beleaguered troopers at the very end? Would Custer be as well known today had he lived? With that thought in mind, we leave the Little Bighorn battlefield.